They told you empaths are weak, soft, too emotional, too forgiving. They told you narcissists are the dangerous ones, the manipulators, the predators, the people who leave destruction behind them. But here's what nobody tells you. The most dangerous person in the room is not the narcissist. It's the empath who's finally had enough. Because an empath doesn't start dangerous. They start observant. They read people like open books. They feel everything, tone shifts, micro expressions, hidden intentions. They see what others miss. And for most of their life, they use that ability to help, to heal, to understand. They give second chances, then third chances, then chances nobody deserved in the first place. They absorb pain that was never theirs to carry. But here's where it changes. An empath doesn't explode overnight. They accumulate, every lie noted, every manipulation cataloged, every betrayal stored quietly in the background. While the narcissist is busy underestimating them, thinking they're too kind to do anything, the empath is learning, mapping patterns, understanding weaknesses, seeing the exact blueprint of who you are. And then something breaks, not loudly, not dramatically, silently. That moment when they realize, I've been giving mercy to people who never deserved access, that's when the shift happens. The empathy doesn't disappear, it sharpens. Now they don't just understand your emotions, they understand how to weaponize that understanding. They know exactly what to say, what to withhold, what to expose, and when. A narcissist seeks control through noise, attention, dominance, chaos, but a fed-up empath. They move in silence, no warnings, no emotional outbursts, no need to prove anything, just precision. And that's what makes them more dangerous. They told you the empath didn't see it coming, that they were blindsided, too trusting, too open. But that's a lie people tell to feel smarter than someone who chose kindness. Because the empath saw everything. They saw the hesitation in your voice when your story didn't match your eyes. They felt the shift in your energy before you even said a word. They noticed how your tone changed depending on who was in the room. They didn't miss it. They processed it, quietly. While you thought you were getting away with something, they were connecting dots you didn't even know existed. That's the difference. An empath doesn't react fast. They read first. They sit in silence and observe patterns most people are too distracted to notice. They watch how you treat people you don't need. They listen to what you say and what you avoid saying. They pick up on contradictions like a radar. Not because they're looking for flaws, but because they feel truth and inconsistency at the same time. And it doesn't sit right with them. Still, they stay. That's where people get confused. They assume staying means ignorance. But staying for an empath is a decision, not a weakness. They stay because they believe in potential. They stay because they understand pain behind behavior. They stay because they can see the version of you that could exist if you chose to be better. But every moment they stay, they're learning you. Every reaction you give, stored. Every excuse you make, remembered. Every time you crossed a line, recorded without a word. They don't need to write it down. They feel it. An emotional memory is sharper than anything you can erase. You might forget what you said. They won't forget how it felt. That feeling becomes data. Not loud, not dramatic, just precise. They start to recognize your patterns before you repeat them. They know when you're about to lie because they've heard the same rhythm in your voice before. They know when you're about to manipulate because your energy shifts in a way that doesn't align with your words. And still, they give you space, not because they don't know, but because they're giving you a chance to prove them wrong. That's the part most people underestimate. The empath is not hoping blindly. They are testing reality, watching to see if your actions will eventually match your potential. And when they don't explode. They adjust. Quietly pulling back energy, quietly investing less, quietly detaching long before you even notice something changed. You think everything is normal. You think you still have access. But what you don't realize is they've already started stepping away internally, emotionally, strategically. Because once an empath sees a consistent pattern, they stop questioning themselves and start understanding you. That's when the power shifts. Because now it's no longer about confusion. It's clarity. And clarity makes an empath incredibly dangerous to anyone relying on deception, because they can see through it without needing proof. They don't need evidence. They need consistency. And once that consistency reveals who you really are, they don't argue. They don't beg. They don't chase explanations. They observe and decide. That's what makes them different from everyone else. Most people react to what's obvious. Empaths react to what's repeated. They don't judge you by one mistake. They study your behavior over time. And when the pattern becomes undeniable, so does their decision. You might think you fooled them for months, even years. But in reality, you are being understood more deeply than you've ever been understood in your life. Every weakness, every insecurity, every trigger point, seen, not used against you, not exposed, just known. And that's what makes their patience so misunderstood. Because while they were giving you chances, they were also building a complete psychological map of who you are, not out of strategy, but out of awareness. And once that map is complete, there's no confusion left, only choice. And when that choice is finally made, it doesn't come from emotion, it comes from certainty. Because the empath was never blind, they were watching, never clueless, just collecting, never weak, just waiting. Waiting for truth to reveal itself without forcing it. Waiting for patterns to repeat enough times to remove all doubt. Waiting for the moment where their intuition and your actions finally align perfectly. And when that moment comes, there is no hesitation, because now it's not a feeling anymore. It's a fact. And once an empath reaches that point, you don't get another version of them. You don't get the benefit of their understanding. You don't get the softness you once relied on. Because everything they gave you before was given while fully aware of what you were doing. They just chose not to act on it, until they did. The shift doesn't look the way people expect it to. There's no explosion, no dramatic goodbye, no emotional speech filled with accusations. That's what everyone waits for. That's what the narcissist expects. But that's not what happens. Because when an empath reaches that point, they don't break down. They lock in. Everything that once made them hesitate disappears. Every excuse they used to justify your behavior, gone. Every doubt they had about their own intuition erased. And what replaces it is something far more dangerous than anger. Clarity. Cold, unshakable clarity. The kind that doesn't need validation. The kind that doesn't need agreement. The kind that doesn't even need to be explained. Because now, they see you exactly as you are, not who you pretended to be, not who you promised to become, not the potential they once believed in, just the truth, raw, unfiltered, undeniable. And once an empath sees that truth clearly, they don't try to fix it. They don't try to fight it. They accept it. That's the moment everything changes, because acceptance removes emotional chaos. And without emotional chaos, there is no more leverage over them. You can't confuse them anymore. You can't guilt them anymore. You can't manipulate their empathy into staying, because now their empathy is no longer automatic. It's controlled, directed, selective. They still feel everything, but now they choose what deserves a response. And most things don't. That silence isn't weakness. It's discipline. Every word they don't say, intentional. Every reaction they don't give, calculated. Every boundary they set, final. And that's what makes this shift so dangerous. Because the empath you knew would explain themselves, would over-communicate, would try to make you understand their perspective. But the empath you're dealing with now, they don't need you to understand anything. They've already understood enough. So instead of reacting, they start removing, piece by piece, access to their thoughts, access to their emotions, access to their time, until one day you realize you're talking to the same person, but you're not reaching them anymore. Your words don't land. Your tactics don't work. Your usual patterns don't trigger anything. It's like the door is still there, but it's locked from the inside. And no matter how hard you try, you can't get back in. Because once an empath decides to close that door, it doesn't reopen the same way. Not after clarity, not after patterns have been confirmed, not after they've seen the truth without illusions. And here's what makes it even more powerful. They don't need to punish you. They don't need revenge. They don't need to prove anything. Because the shift isn't about you anymore. It's about them. It's about self-respect finally overriding emotional attachment. It's about recognizing that understanding someone doesn't mean tolerating them. It's about realizing that empathy without boundaries is self-destruction. And once that realization hits, there's no going back to who they were before, because now they've experienced what it feels like to choose themselves without guilt, to walk away without needing closure, to stop explaining their pain to people committed to misunderstanding it. That's power, quiet power, the kind that doesn't announce itself, the kind that doesn't seek attention, the kind that simply acts. And when it acts, it's irreversible. You don't get warnings. You don't get countdowns. You don't get one last emotional conversation to fix everything. Because from their perspective, that conversation already happened. not out loud, but internally, over time, through every repeated pattern you showed them, through every moment they gave you the benefit of the doubt, through every chance you didn't take seriously. They already processed it all. So when they finally act, it feels sudden to you, but to them, it's overdue. And that's why this version of an empath is so dangerous, because they don't act on impulse. They act on accumulated certainty. And certainty doesn't hesitate. It doesn't second guess. It doesn't look back. It moves forward with precision, cutting ties cleanly, setting boundaries without negotiation, walking away without emotional residue, no anger, no bitterness, just finality. And that finality is what most people can't handle because they're used to emotional reactions. They're used to chaos. They're used to drama they can navigate and manipulate. But this is something else. This is someone who no longer needs anything from you. No validation, no apology, no closure, nothing. And when someone reaches that point, they become untouchable. Not because they're aggressive, but because they're unavailable. Unavailable to manipulation. Unavailable to emotional games. Unavailable to anything that once had power over them. That's the shift. It's not loud. It's not visible at first. But once it happens, it changes everything. Because the empath didn't lose their ability to feel. They just gained the ability to decide. And once they start deciding based on truth instead of hope, based on patterns instead of promises, based on self-respect instead of emotional attachment, there is nothing more dangerous than that version of them. Silence is misunderstood. People think silence is weakness, avoidance, inability to confront. But that's only true for people who are still controlled by emotion. For a fed-up empath, silence is not absence, it's strategy. Because when they finally choose silence, it's not because they have nothing to say. It's because they've said everything that mattered and watched it be ignored. Every conversation that went in circles, remembered. Every time they tried to explain themselves, dismissed. Every moment they gave you clarity, turned into confusion. They didn't go silent randomly. They went silent after exhausting every word they had. And that's what makes it so powerful. Because this silence isn't reactive. It's intentional. It's the moment they realize you don't value communication. You value control. And once they see that, they stop feeding it. No more emotional responses. No more defending themselves. No more trying to be understood by someone committed to misunderstanding them. Because they finally understand something most people never do. Not every situation deserves a reaction. Not every person deserves access. And not every truth needs to be spoken out loud. Some truths are meant to be acted on, quietly, decisively, without announcement. That's what their silence becomes. A decision, a boundary, a message without words that says, you no longer have access to me, and that message hits harder than anything they could have said, because words can be twisted, words can be debated, words can be manipulated. But silence? Silence leaves no room for negotiation. It creates a void that cannot be controlled. And for someone who thrives on control, that void is unbearable. Because now, they don't know what you're thinking. They don't know how you feel. They don't know if their tactics are working. They've lost their ability to read you. And for the first time, they're the one in the dark. That's what silence does. It flips the power dynamic without a single confrontation. No arguments. No emotional scenes. No closure conversations. Just absence. And absence forces reality to surface. Because without your presence, without your energy, without your reactions to feed off of, everything they relied on begins to collapse. They're left alone with their own patterns, their own behavior, their own consequences. And there's no one there to absorb it anymore. That's what makes a fed-up empath's silence so dangerous. It doesn't attack. It doesn't destroy directly. It simply withdraws everything that was holding the other person together. And when that support disappears, so does the illusion of control. Because control was never real. It was borrowed. Borrowed from your patience. Borrowed from your understanding. Borrowed from your willingness to stay. And once you take that back, there's nothing left for them to stand on. That's the power of silence. It doesn't need to prove anything. It reveals everything. It reveals who respected you and who only valued what they could take from you. It reveals who tries to fix things and who panics when they can't control the outcome. Where it reveals who actually cared and who only cared when they were losing access. All without a single word. That's precision. That's control. That's mastery over emotion. Because the hardest thing for an empath to do is not speak, not explain, not give one more chance to be understood. But once they reach that point, it means something inside them has permanently changed. They no longer feel the need to prove their worth. They no longer feel responsible for fixing broken communication. They no longer carry the burden of making someone else understand what they refuse to see. And that freedom, it's terrifying to anyone who depended on their presence. Because now, there's no way back in, no emotional opening to slip through, no vulnerability to exploit, no conversation to manipulate, just silence, solid, unmoving, unreachable. And the more you try to break it, the stronger it becomes. Because this silence is not built on anger. It's built on certainty. Certainty that they've seen enough. Certainty that they've given enough. Certainty that nothing you say now will change what you've already shown. And when silence is backed by certainty, it becomes permanent. Not temporary distance. Not a pause. An ending. One that doesn't need explanation. One that doesn't require agreement. One that doesn't even acknowledge your reaction. Because your reaction no longer matters. That's the part people struggle to accept. Silence removes your influence completely. You can't argue with it. You can't negotiate with it. You can't twist it into something it's not. It simply exists. And in that existence, it creates distance that cannot be closed by force, only by change. But by the time an empath chooses silence, they're no longer waiting for change. They've already accepted that it's not coming. So they move forward without you, without looking back, without breaking their silence. Because now, their peace is louder than any explanation they could ever give. And protecting that peace is no longer optional.